much for joining us on this next installment of our Peer Perspective series. I'm Haley, I'm the Hope for HIE social worker, and I'm so excited to have my two panelists here with me today, Leah and Jenny. They are going to be sharing about their journey of HIE learning and attention. And so what we'll do is I'm going to let them introduce themselves and kind of share a little bit about their journey, and then we'll get into some more details about how they've navigated learning and attention and HIE. So if you guys want to go ahead and get started, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Leah Solomon. We live in Chicago, and our son, who's 5.5, had suffered HIE at birth. And he has since been diagnosed with ADHD. Should I kind of let Jenny hop on as well?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so my daughter, who is 9 years old, she was diagnosed with HIE. We are in the US in the South. And whenever she was born, she lost oxygen to her brain because she got stuck. And so it was a pretty traumatic experience for us. And I also have I have 4 daughters total, so 4 girls, and Josephine is my third of all 4 of my girls. And it's just been a pretty crazy journey for us navigating Josephine and HIE. So
thank you both for sharing, and we're just really excited to hear more about your journey. I know this is going to help a lot of families who are also navigating things that might be a little bit similar. So to start today's panel, we're going to talk a little bit about just if you would share about those first couple of years and then different signs, symptoms, questions, and things that were happening in your family life with your children that kind of made you think, I may want to go and get some additional help, some additional support. Some of the things that might be helpful to share about are feedback from like preschool or any type of childcare setting, feedback that you've observed in the home environment with peers, with siblings, and then just sort of what did you see that your child was maybe doing or not doing? And then if your child has any specific diagnoses related to learning and attention, if you don't mind sharing what they are and just kind of a little bit of details about that, that would be great.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. So our son was, developed pretty typically for the first year or so. We even had EI come and do a full evaluation. They said he didn't really qualify because he was, within normal limits for all milestones. He walked kind of on the appropriate timeline and talked similarly around the appropriate timeline. And then at age 2, we enrolled him in like a preschool, and that's when we started to get some feedback from the teachers. Like he was really busy, he had trouble following directions and sharing. And we saw a little bit of that at home, but he was our oldest, so we did not really know any different. I'm actually a speech pathologist, so I'm like, I should probably know this stuff, but when it's your own kid, it's just hard. And, some kids, it's not so cut and dry. So it was kind of, we had to do a lot of investigating. So we did start with some occupational therapy. We definitely got mixed, things from different ones because we tried a few. One was like, no, he doesn't qualify, he's fine. Then another one's like, oh yes, let's do it. So we jumped on that, and then kind of those behaviors at school and at home persisted. And I can go more into that. We noticed a lot of just that hyperactivity. So like constantly moving, constantly talking, kind of impulsive. And we ended up trying a couple of different therapies. So we tried like a little speech therapy, social skills group. We've tried social work and a couple of different therapies. And ultimately, as a parent, I decided to pursue a neuropsych evaluation for my child at around age 4, just to get a better idea of what was happening with him. And it was really helpful. It showed that his IQ is actually really high. He's a very bright child, but he struggles in a lot of other areas, like those executive functioning skills and those social emotional skills are definitely behind. And we continued kind of with the therapies they recommended, like a social skills group and social work, and those have definitely been helpful. And then I pursued a evaluation through our school district, even though none of the teachers or anything that he's had have told me to do it. I just felt like it was the right next step. And I had to like kind of push. So I didn't realize, but you can actually request a formal evaluation. You don't really have to go through the screening process, because I was nervous if we went through the screening and they were just with him in a one-on-one room, they would say, he's fine, because on the surface, like everything seems pretty typical. But once you see him interacting, in a busy classroom or, when there's a lot going on, things show up. So they did end up doing an evaluation. So speech, OT, and psych. And he did end up qualifying for an IEP under developmental delay. But we did ultimately end up getting a ADHD diagnosis through a developmental pediatrician. So he looked through the neuropsych, he looked through the IEP paperwork and all the reports we've had, and met with our child for a long time. And he ultimately said, this is ADHD, and that's kind of where we're at now. So.
Thank you so much for sharing. And just for our families that are international, with both of our panelists being in the US, early intervention, that's what they mean by EI. And then IEP is an individualized education plan. Some places may utilize others, but it's basically something you would talk with the school district about, that's for children that need extra support and need some sort of different accommodations. So depending on where you live, what you want to say to the school system is, I'm looking for some accommodations and some extra and additional support, and what are some of those offerings. And you can reach out on our state-based, country-based, area-based groups and kind of find out the verbiage and the information for where you live. Even in the US, everyone's going to have a little bit different of experience. So when you're dealing with something from a school setting, we definitely, and at Hope for HIE, encourage you to kind of figure out what are those things that are available to you where you live, and talk with other organizations local to you. In the US, you may want to reach out to parent. There's a bunch of other organizations. Just kind of wanting to give a little bit more clarification, because with having two panelists that are in the US, the things that they may be describing, you may have to use some different verbiage depending on where you live, and everybody's school district and school system is very different. Thank you so much for sharing. I know this is really helpful information for a ton of families.
Sure.
Yeah, and for me, similar experience with Leah, but I think even to just jump to what you were saying is figuring out what support is there was like the hardest part. And so the Hope for HIE community is such a great resource to be able to find where to go, because it was very confusing when you have no clue what you're doing. And my daughter is my third daughter, and it was still really confusing and trying to figure it out. But for the first couple of years for her, same thing, like you said, Leah, like we were doing great. We were hitting milestones. We were looking at everything like, oh my gosh, she's going to be fine. We're not going to have to deal with anything major. And they had always said, pay attention in case some learning disabilities come up later. And so there was always that, okay, this is a possibility. And then when my daughter was about kindergarten, she started having seizures again. So after the seizures came back was when I realized, okay, I've got to pay more attention to everything else that's going on. And as the seizures came back, I was constantly checking in with the school. How is she doing? Is she meeting the requirements that she's supposed to be at? And they're like, yeah, she's fine, nothing major. And for my daughter, who's now diagnosed with ADHD as well, she's on the more of the inattentive side, and she's extremely compliant. And so it was harder for us to diagnose for her. And so then when she got into first grade, second grade, they started saying like, she's not doing that great in school. We're really struggling with her. She's having a hard time paying attention, a hard time transitioning from one thing to the next, because she gets so hyper-focused on one thing and doesn't want to move on to the next. And so at the time, we're like, okay, let's figure out what this means. But most of the feedback from everybody, from her teachers and from what we were seeing, was she's doing great. And then being in a home setting with 4 kids, she kind of gets lost a little bit in our little mini crowd we have over here. But she could hang, like she was tracking with all the other kids, meeting milestones. So it didn't really seem like much was off. And so actually last year, when she was going to be going from second grade to third grade, she was not doing that great in school. She started third grade. And when she started third grade, she was really struggling. I mean, coming home with spelling tests and getting all of them wrong. And at that time, I really realized, and I realized this in the hospital and all along the way, I've really got to be the one advocating for my child, you know, nobody else is going to do it but me. And so it was again another experience where I was like, okay, I'm the one that's got to step up. So I had to go to the school and I had to fight for her and say, please put her back in second grade. There's something going on. We really need to focus on her. And in the midst of doing this, I had actually called her neurologist. Now, I know that other people might go to their pediatrician or their primary care or whatever, but for us, I'm really connected to the neurologist. She's great. She connects with me often. We message each other. We have an app that for the hospital, and I'm able to reach out to her often. So I have a really close relationship with her. And she's been Josephine's neurologist since she was a baby. So reached out to her and said, I need support. I don't feel like I'm able to show up for her the way that she needs. And I don't know how to because she's not like my other children. And so some of the things that I observed at home is I'd be like, okay, girls, wake up in the morning. It's time to brush our hair, brush our teeth, put on your school clothes. And then I'd leave and go start getting ready myself. And I'd walk back and everybody's got their hair brushed, their school clothes on and their teeth brushed. And Josephine is, you know, like playing with her shoes or her dolls or, you know, still brushing her teeth, but now she's also playing with something while she brushes her teeth. So just little things like that. And I'm like, do I reprimand her? Do I not reprimand? Like, how do I handle this as a parent? Because the other girls can do it. And so those were a lot of the observations at home, that part. And then the other part of just being really inattentive. So even in those moments, I'd go up to her and be like, okay, Jojo, it's time to do this. And she'd be staring off into space. And so I'm like, okay, really need support. So we ended up doing the same thing, the neuropsych evaluation. And through the school, we were able to do a 504 because she has seizures. And so 504 is for medical reasoning. So it's similar to an IEP. I still don't know all of the details that differentiate the two. And again, it was really hard to figure out what was the right thing for her because I didn't understand any of the school jargon when they even told me, like, get her an IEP. I had no clue what that meant. So we got her the 504 that helps her out, but the neurologist gave us the referral to be able to do the neuropsych evaluation. And so we did that. One disclaimer I will say about that neuropsych evaluation that was kind of somewhat disappointing, but I wish I would have known ahead of time, was it took forever to get in. And so she told us, she gave me the referral. I remember very well. I went to the car and I start making phone calls to all these places and everybody's like, sure, our next appointment is a year from now. And I'm like, are you kidding? Like, I need to help her now. This needs to be something that we handle now. And so we were able to get the neuropsych eval. The appointment that I got was 10 months from when the doctor's appointment was. And I had always heard the phrase before, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So I called the neuropsych place and I introduced myself and I asked them if an appointment would be like if somebody cancels, if they could please call me. And then I kind of called periodically every 3 to 4 weeks just to remind them I'm here and I'm totally available. And it ended up happening for us. We got our appointment within 4 months. Because I kept calling. I think they remembered me. I was really nice when I did so. I made sure I wasn't annoying or anything like that. But they called us. We were able to get the neuropsych evaluation. And the diagnosis we got was that ADHD with inattentive presentation. We got learning disability with math, with reading. And then we also got a coordination disorder that she was given, which was good for us because my daughter is very clumsy and would run into things often. And it kind of became a joke, but it was cool to actually have the diagnosis to kind of back up what we were seeing at home. So now that we have the diagnosis, she's on medication and it has been the world of difference for our family. Just little things like throughout the summer, I have my girls that do like worksheets and things like that, so they don't lose all the stuff they learned through the school year. And now Josephine is really able to focus on those things and not get so sidetracked now that we're able to give her medication. And so being able to find interventions and things that help her has really helped us a lot. So it was a fight to get here, right? And I'm sure that there might be a few other things down the road that we have to fight for too, which seems like to be the trend sometimes when we have stuff like this to deal with. But yeah, so now we're with the ADHD diagnosis, and it's been super helpful for us.
Thank you both for sharing about all of that. The next kind of thing we've already kind of started to talk about, but I know that both of you have a lot of great information that will be so helpful. So Leah, if you don't mind starting, I'm just I know y'all have done some really important appointments and you have had some great details with kind of, how you've navigated all that. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit more about the developmental pediatrician, some more about the neuropsych, and then any other appointments that you think might be really helpful that families may want to try and kind of follow up with?
Sure, happy to. So when Ethan was like maybe 2 and we just started hearing, the school feedback, I called the developmental pediatrician practice that I had heard highly regarded from people in my area, and it was like 2-year wait list. And I did try calling a few times, but that's why we ended up going the neuropsych route first, because it was a little bit easier to get in. I will say, since my son was only 4, it was hard to find a neuropsychologist who would evaluate a child that young. And sometimes the results are not as clear when they're younger. So just some things to keep in mind. However, I'm still happy we did it. I think it gave us some clarity, and it gave us like a base for data and to see how he was progressing. So once we did get into the developmental pediatrician about 2.5 years later, when he was closer to age 5, we did have the neuropsych report. We had a lot of data from different therapies. And that's been really helpful. My son is similar in that those executive functioning and attention skills, especially at home, are just tough. So like that, Jenny's story about getting ready in the morning just really hit home, because it's the same thing like for bedtime. Like we always, take a bath, we get dressed, we brush our teeth, but it takes like maybe 5 to 6 reminders versus I feel like it should probably take maybe 1 or 2. So it's really challenging. And the developmental pediatrician gave us a lot of resources, which was really helpful. So like a lot of, some book recommendations on ADHD and medication recommendations, and, told us kind of which therapies he thought would be the most helpful. And that was just really nice, because it's really, like you said, Jenny, it's so hard to know. And I'm actually a speech pathologist, but it's just different when it's your kid and it's your first time going through it. You really do have to fight and advocate for your child. And especially for these like in-between kids who are not so cut and dry. We did have a lot of the preschools just kind of being like, he's keeping up, he's fine. Like, you don't need to get him evaluated. But my parental gut and instinct told me to do it. I just, when your child is struggling, and you have to just really be their number one advocate, because they're too young to, be able to advocate for themselves. And in terms of the IEP, we ended up using an educational advocate, which, not everyone does, but I just felt so lost in terms of the process, what he should be getting, what he could be getting. And it was just really nice to talk to someone whose job is literally to understand and inspect IEPs and really be there for you as like an unbiased outside source. So we actually had our advocate look at the paperwork before we signed anything, and we did have her come to the latest meeting. So my son's going to be going into kindergarten in the fall. So we had a transition meeting, what they call it, where they transition the IEP from preschool to kindergarten. And the advocate attended with us, which was just really reassuring, because she has seen lots and lots of plans for school. And it was nice for her to look it over and kind of make sure we're hitting all the bases, because he is one of those more behavioral kids who he's not compliant. So I really want to make sure we're doing everything we can to set him up for success, and not just for him, but for the teacher, for the other students in the class. Like, the more positive experiences he can have, like, I feel like the better for his confidence and for his overall well-being. So yeah.
Yeah, and then for us, the developmental pediatrician was pretty much something that we had gotten from the beginning. We didn't experience much of a wait time. I don't know why that is. Now that you're telling me that you had a really long wait time, we did not for that one. It was the neuropsych, so that's interesting. The neuropsych one was the one that took us forever. And the neuropsych evaluation, that appointment, like I said, it was like, we ended up getting it in 4 months, but the appointments were as far out as a year. And during that appointment, it was pretty wild. It was almost all day long. And while we were there, my daughter was in the back doing all of the assessments and whatnot. And periodically they would bring me out an iPad and I would fill out assessments. So it was me filling out assessments while she was doing assessments in the back. And so it was, again, it was a pretty long time. They gave her like a lunch break and everything for her to come out and chill out for a little bit. And then after we did the neuropsych, they had told us that the wait time for even the results from that was going to be another 6 to 8 weeks. And so just the whole process felt really, really drawn out. For follow-up appointments too, like even to just jump back, in the beginning, we did physical therapy right away because she had really low tone. She had a feeding tube from the beginning, which we were able to take out at a year old. And so in the beginning, there was a lot of interventions, but once she got that feeding tube out and everything really seemed to be going well, it was like we didn't really need the stuff. And then it became even harder to kind of get back into that world once the seizures came back up. So that was probably one of the most challenging thing for us. And even navigating what it looks like to have, her seizures and what we do with these compared to what we're doing with her, attention deficit and all that kind of stuff. So.
Thank you both for sharing that. I think I'd love to hear a little bit more because I know that these appointments are just so in depth and they're so overwhelming and there's just so many parts and moving pieces. So obviously with both of you being in the US, things may be different for our international families, but if you wouldn't mind sharing for the developmental and the neuropsych and any other appointments, a little bit more about how long were the appointments as far as did you, I know Jenny, you mentioned some of this, but like, did you have to do a lot of prep before? Like, were there phone appointments? Was there paperwork you had to provide? Was this covered at all by any of your insurance? Was it all private pay? Were there some different options available to you? Just sort of a little bit more about how that looked. And then was the follow-up over the phone? Was it something that they sent you a packet? Just a little bit more to kind of clarify, because I know these are appointments that so many families in our community go to and want to go to, and it can be so much information that's so overwhelming. And to just hear another parent share their journey is just so helpful. So thank you both so much.
Sure. Happy to. Sorry. And if I need to elaborate more, just let me know.
It's great.
So for the neuropsych, I first called a few that I had just heard from word of mouth and from some Facebook groups that I'm in that were good. And one of the ones I talked to who I really liked said she doesn't see kids under, I think she said age 6, and my kid was 4. But she gave me the name of someone who sees, or 2 names of people who see kids at age 4. Neither of them took insurance. So it was out of pocket, but I felt good knowing it was like a referral, a highly regarded referral, because there are some people who take insurance in our area who are good, but sometimes I've heard they miss some things or it's not as thorough as people would like. So I did end up doing the out of pocket route. And we ended up talking on the phone first. We did a parent meeting. The psychologist went to go observe my child in their preschool environment, which I thought was very helpful because they got to see how he interacted with other children and how he followed the directions in the class and responded to the teachers, etc. Then we came in, I think on 2 separate occasions for a couple hours each time. My child is 4 and has pretty severe ADHD, so it was kind of like pulling teeth to get through all of the assessment. So we had to do like mini bribes here and there, some treats. And then they ended up getting through whatever assessments that they could, and they felt like they had enough information. And then, like Jenny said, it did take a few weeks until we had a meeting where we met in person and they provided us with a report of their findings and we kind of discussed And with everything, you take what you need and you kind of leave. So like there was a lot of things I found really helpful. There's a few things that I didn't really agree with. So it's nice because you take what you need. So I took a lot of the data in terms of his social emotional development. I took a lot of the data in terms of his IQ and then kind of went from there. With the developmental pediatrician, this one was covered under my insurance. Maybe that's why it took so long to get in, because a lot of people are trying to go to this one. I don't know. But he was really great. I filled out a bunch of surveys online that the office sent me before. They also had a psychologist, I believe, interview me before and ask me a ton of questions and background history, I think to kind of prep the doctor. So he has a starting point. And I also brought into the appointment like a thick packet of reports and the IEP and all this stuff for them to have a copy of. And then the doctor came in, and it was probably a good 2-hour appointment of him talking to my son, playing with him a little bit, talking to me, asking questions, looking, clarifying questions from, all the surveys and everything that I have talked about. And then ultimately discussing like ADHD, what that looks like, and kind of clarifying some things from the neuropsych report that weren't clear. Because, our son does have some social challenges. So I was, asking like, could it be autism? And that was something he was able to rule out at that appointment. So just to get a clearer idea, like I said, like when your kid's really young, sometimes it's hard to tell. And as he gets older, it's getting a little clearer. So that is about the neuropsych and developmental pediatrician. One thing I forgot I left out was we did end up seeing a psychiatrist as well, just to talk about the medication options. I felt that was really helpful because our pediatrician kind of, she specializes in, kids, but the medication for ADHD was not like her main thing that she does. So I felt like having someone who specializes in child psychiatry could be helpful just to explain to us even like some of the options. And our son ended up trying some non-stimulant options to start that ended up working for him. We've tried some stimulants and it's been a little tough for him, especially because he runs on the anxious side, and some of those made it a little worse for him, but just something to consider. We ended up talking with the psychiatrist. I felt like it was helpful.
Thank you. That's such great information, because I feel like these appointments just have so many moving parts, and then you're waiting these long wait times usually, and sometimes you're not told these things in advance. And then, as we've all talked about, and for this, just not being able to get all the information, and then all of a sudden it's kind of you hurry up and then wait, and then oh, it's time for this appointment and I need to be prepared. And so this is so helpful for our families that are maybe having this appointment or are looking to have one of these appointments, just to have somebody share kind of what they've navigated.
Sure. Yeah, and we kind of did it backwards because we went to the developmental pediatrician first. And when we went there, we actually got the diagnosis. She got a sensory processing disorder diagnosis first. And that was around when she was about 3 years old. And so they deemed her a sensory seeker. And so it was wanting all of the stimulation possible. But going to that appointment, it was similar to your experience. I filled out all the evaluations online ahead of time. And then we sat in the meeting or at the appointment. They spoke with me for quite a bit of time, watched her play, did a few things with her. And then we got a referral for occupational therapy after that one. And then that was when it was a few years later for the neuropsych evaluation. Now, our developmental pediatrician was covered with my insurance. And then for the neuropsych evaluation, our neurologist gave me a list of doctors to call. And that was the list that I remember being in the car calling, and all of them having to be waiting a year before we get in. But that list was a list that ones that were covered by our insurance. And so I also tried to go the route of finding one that was outside of our insurance, and it was very expensive. And so that is why I kept calling. And so eventually, luckily, I was able to get in. If I would not have gotten in, I may have gone, because this new school year is coming up before we know it. And I wanted to get it before the school year started so that I could make sure that she was in the right grade and getting the right everything, interventions, whatever it is that she needed. And then, yeah, so once I didn't have as much of an extensive experience as you with the neuropsych evaluation, they called me, told me they had an available appointment the next day. I canceled everything. I went in for the appointment. Like I said, we were there most of the day with a little bit of a break. They told me to bring snacks and a lunch for her, because it would be a long day. And we were there all day. I filled out my assessments while I was sitting in the waiting room, and then that was pretty much it. I really didn't talk to anybody other than when we first arrived, there was like 30 minutes where I went back to talk to the doctor. And even talking to the doctor, I went into a room and it was a desk with a computer screen, and then the doctor was on the computer screen. So it was a very virtual experience. But I talked to her there, and then they did the evaluations, and then we got an email a few weeks later that gave us the results. And then I just forwarded those results to our neurologist, and the neurologist was the one that walked us through everything. I do believe that you can get, if you want to get, if medication is a route somebody wants to go. I'm not sure how everyone works, but I had the option of either going through my neurologist or going through the pediatrician. And similar to you, Leah, I wanted to go through the neurologist because she has a lot of experience with this. The pediatrician maybe doesn't have as much. And so she suggested to, like, let's go through the neurologist. And she has looked at how many patients that she has with similar experience to Josephine, and that's how she made her decision on what she thought would be a good medication for her. And luckily for us, the first one that we decided to try ended up working out really well for her. So
Thank you both. I know that this, is a lot of detail and a lot of really intense information, but I think that it's so helpful because these are appointments that can be so helpful, and you can get a lot of information, but just navigating them is really difficult. So I really appreciate both of you sharing. The last little bit of our panel we're going to do before we open it up for questions and to chat is just going to be about support and resources, and then just how you're navigating your child's diagnoses at home. So first, I'm just going to share a little bit about, the resources we have at Hope for HIE, and then I'll open it up for the two of you to share about the resources that you've used and kind of some things that you found helpful navigating at home and at school. But for Hope for HIE, we do have myself, the social worker, on staff, so please feel free to reach out if there's anything I can help you with. I do help connect families with local resources. So in the US with Parent to Parent, or even international, I've helped families find resources for physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. So please, if you're needing assistance with being connected in your area, don't hesitate to reach out. We do also have a child life specialist on staff. So she is great for helping navigate all kinds of things. So please reach out to her as well. Her name is Annie, and you can get connected with both of us through the Hope for HIE website. Obviously, we have plenty of support groups, Facebook groups, so please feel free to utilize those for your family. And if you're ever wondering what's available, don't hesitate to reach out to me and I can help you. And then some of the things that I would love for both of you to just share about is the different resources that you've utilized in your journey so far. And then I know some of the things we've talked about that maybe you can elaborate on, or just if you're utilizing things like checklists, reward strategies, how do you navigate play dates or birthday parties or larger group outings, holidays? And then what have you found as far as like inclusive activities or adaptive sports or play groups, or just things that help kind of navigate the additional support that may be best for your child?
Sure. So I definitely have joined some of the Hope for HIE Facebook groups. I like that in-betweener one, and some just local ones. Like there's a, North Suburban Moms of Special Needs, things like that, just to ask those questions. And you can even post anonymously. So that's been helpful. We definitely do a visual schedule, especially like for getting ready in the morning, for before bed. I like to use a visual timer. So I ordered one on Amazon. It's like, it's kind of like a clock, just because my son really doesn't have a sense of time, and transitions can be hard for him. So it's really good for him to see how much time is left, to hear the noise go off, to know like, okay, we got to stop. Sometimes it's still hard, even with all of that. In terms of like reward strategies, we've definitely tried, some reward things. I have definitely noticed like the most, like my son learning his own motivation and like the connection with us is the biggest thing. So, entrusting him like with some chores around the house, like putting his plate away after dinner, putting his clothes in the laundry bin, like those give him a little ownership over our family and the family dynamics, and I think those are really helpful for him. In terms of play dates, I definitely find play dates just with one other child the most beneficial. I love hosting the play date so that I can, be around if some sort of breakdown happens, or if my son's, focusing on one thing and not, going along with the friend's idea. So I love to host play dates. I'll let my son go to other people's houses for play dates too, but I'll usually come because he's only 5, or, I've tried to drop off play date once in a while, but I kind of like to be around. And then he actually does okay at birthday parties. And think, he enjoys it. So, and he is a social kid. He just is impulsive and stuff like that. So, one thing I have noticed is just as he's gotten older, things have gotten better in terms of like group activities. So he's very into sports. When he first started, soccer, he was like, could barely attend for like a minute, was pushing and, not being safe. Now that he's 5, he's able to attend, the full hour at his soccer games, and he can attend a group basketball class. And there was times I was like, this is never going to happen. And it did. So sometimes just with time. And then just finding things that he's interested in. So, he likes sports. So honing in on that. He can swim independently at age 5. So like doing some extra swimming, going off the diving board a million times, like just ways to get the energy out, I think is so important, not just for kids with ADHD, but everyone, especially boys. And then for myself, I have a therapist for myself. We've talked to a therapist, like in terms of like helping us parent better, and reading parenting books, and especially nowadays, like there's so much more out there on like neurodiversity and how to support, someone who learns a little differently or whose brain works a little differently. So learning just about that, because then when, my son acts out or isn't, following directions, I'm not like, oh, he's not listening. I'm like, he needs to build the skill of like attending, so there's some skills that he's lacking that I try to really focus on that. But yeah, I mean, and it's hard to know sometimes whether, before he starts an activity, should I let them know he has ADHD? Should I not? And I've kind of like skirted the line. I think being open and communicating is so important. So I always like to tell, his teachers at school, his counselors, like, please we're here anytime, email us, call us. We love to collaborate. And that's been really helpful, just to have the open lines of communication. Yeah.
Yeah, and same for me. Hope for HIE Facebook group. My daughter was born in 2015, and I just remember being in the hospital. I like never left the hospital for like a full month, and just sitting on that little couch right next to her hospital bed every single day, and I was in that group. And so that group was a main source for me of support, because I had no clue what was happening at the time. I still kind of don't, but it was very helpful to be able to be in there to ask questions and be able to see what other moms are doing and what other kids are going through and what it looks like. And, I got a lot of my resource from there, especially in the beginning. And then, finding support now, like Leah said too, I have a therapist that helps me walk through a lot of this stuff. And then also just really connecting with people. I too struggle with being able to just like with making the decision. Do I tell people this is what she's got going on ahead of time, or do I not? Because like you said, she's kind of, on the fence sometimes. And so I don't want to set her up for people to treat her differently. But at the same time, sometimes I need them to treat her differently, because she is different. And so it becomes challenging, but definitely letting all the teachers know and things like that has been really helpful for us. And then daily checklist is something we do. We do the same thing. I went on the little Canva, like the little Photoshop app that you can download, and I made a picture diagram of what she needs to do in the morning, and she loves it. I got a little dry erase marker so she can check the boxes as she goes. So she loves to be able to come tell me that she got her checklist done. And then another thing that's really helped us, I love that you said that timer. I'm totally going to look at one of those up on Amazon for sure. But another thing that's really helped us is we have a sleep light. And so the light is red when she needs to be in bed and green when she's allowed to get up, because that was like a major issue for us. And so when the light goes green, then she gets up in the morning. It makes it so we can all sleep in a little bit longer and don't have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning like she wants to sometimes. So just little things like that are really helpful for us. For my daughter Josephine, for reward wise, we do a little marble jar for her, and she really loves it. Since she has gotten the medication, it's been a lot easier to give tasks. But she still has this like hyper focus on things. So sometimes if I give her a task, like she will do that task until it is done. And so that can be sometimes helpful, but just making sure that I'm paying attention to her and giving her, you know, rewards for whenever she's able to do some of the stuff that's a little bit more challenging for her to do. And then for play dates and with caregivers, one-on-one always works better for us. In a group setting, my daughter tends to just get really lost, and kind of goes into her own isolation type thing. And normally will just play on her own, which is fine. She's perfectly content. It's not like she's sad when she does it, but in order for her to really interact with other kids, it needs to be a one-on-one setting so that she has that focused attention. And same with at birthday parties, she sometimes will get a little bit lost off doing her own thing. And so being able to help her connect with kids, being that she's 9, some of the challenge now is facing other little girls at school that might be bullies. And so this is kind of a little bit of a new area for me, and I don't like it because it's really hard. And so just being able to support her, but not just me being able to support her, finding other adults that she feels safe with, that are able to support her. So I have a really close friend who also talks with Josephine often. And so it's really nice that she has more than one outlet of somebody to be able to talk to. And then my daughter also has a therapist that she goes and sees and talks to, which is a lot more of play therapy, but it's really good for her to be able to find somebody to like work through some of this stuff too. And then inclusive activities, we are blessed enough that we have a church that we go to that has a sensory room. And so Josephine will go into like the bigger church with all the kids, and sometimes it'll be overloaded and they'll notice Josephine like in the corner by herself. And when they notice that, they have a couple people that are on staff that work in that sensory room. They'll just grab her and take her to the sensory room, and she flipping loves it because she's like, I got to go to the special room today, you know? And so it's a special little thing for her to be able to do, but just finding those areas that are inclusive. And then also I think one thing that's important too, at least in the States, is, and this is jumping back to schools, public schools have a lot more requirements that they need to meet when it comes to, you know, meeting the needs of all children, but private schools are a little bit more challenging. And so my other daughters go to a private school. It's been really hard to get Josephine the support that she needs, but we have actually found a private school that is able to meet those needs for her. So they have that one-on-one intervention where they pull them out of the classroom. And so I think it's just us as parents really finding the places where we can connect with other people that are willing to be able to like stand in the gap for our kids and show up for them and love on them. And maybe not as much as we do, but at least enough to be able to help out with some of these things that they might need extra attention to. So.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for taking the time out of your day to share all of this great, amazing information. I have learned so much today. I know all of the families that have joined us live have learned, and I know that once we post this on our YouTube channel, your information is going to reach so many families, and they're just going to get so much awesome information. So we're going to be ending the recording portion of this and opening up for a few minutes of questions. My last thing I just want to remind everyone is these peer perspective panel series are obviously not any medical advice. These are just parents sharing their journey about their child. And we just want to make sure that we're giving information to help everyone out, but definitely follow up with your medical providers and your child's medical team for any major decision making. But thank you both so much for all your information. I know that it has helped so many families already.